Hey everybody, John Soriano here, and I want to do another video blog installment about turbocharging your EFT. This time, I'm going to be talking about that regard and NLP meta model. Now, the NLP meta model was created to get through what's called fluff language and try and get through to the actual core aspects. So, in relation to EFT, you would be able to challenge, quote unquote, challenge the meta model violations to get to key aspects to tap on. Now, there's three components of the meta model. There's generalizations, deletions, and distortions. Now, an actual study of the meta model is kind of in depth and a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try and just keep it simple here, and certainly in terms of its relation to EFT and tapping. Now, generalizations are pretty much what it says. They're generalities based on something. Now, most of the time in our lives, generalities actually serve a purpose. In terms of doorknobs, let's say, for example, you know that you have to turn it in a certain direction to open it. It doesn't matter what kind of doorknob it is. You just know that, in general, you turn them in a certain direction in order to open. So that's a good generality. You don't want to have to put a whole lot of thought into, well, gee, that's a different doorknob than I have at home, and then have to think through the process. So in that regard, generality was good. Now, one of the things that made me consider speaking about the meta model in relation to EFT tapping, I've done this kind of thing before, but it's really brought it to the forefront for me lately, and I did a post about it on Facebook as well, is the current political campaign that's going on at the time that I'm recording this here in the US, and the media coverage in particular of what's going on. Now, if you want a real study in meta model violations, look at the US media, or any media for that matter, mainstream media, especially when it comes to politics. And I'll give an example actually from the other day. Now, I'm not doing this to be partisan, I'm just doing this to bring out a point. The New York Times is a very left-leaning newspaper. I actually like reading the New York Times because they're very well written and very in-depth kind of articles. So I like reading the paper. I don't agree with their politics all the time, but I like reading the paper. There's also another major newspaper in New York, the New York Daily News. Now, I was reading the headlines because I caught something off the Daily News front page headline, and it was about the superdelegates and basically how Hillary Clinton is stealing the superdelegates and they're not going to give any attention to what the people's vote is. They're going to just support Hillary, period, no matter what the people's vote is. And this isn't a discourse in the political system or how it works. I'm just using this example to point something out. So New York Daily News had that full spread front page, Hillary stealing the election from the public. The New York Times, which is a paper that supports Hillary Clinton, had no mention of that at all. None. Zip. Zero. Now, that is a deletion in the biggest sense of the word. Okay, they chose just not to cover that at all. You see generalities, deletions, and distortions in the media coverage of all kinds of things, not just politics. And that was just one example. But here's the thing. Excuse me. In times of looking at the media about different subjects, I honestly think that this is what's starting to get to people. This is what's starting to get people upset and angry about things going on, is the media's complete violations of the meta model. And they start to get to the point where people start buying into these distortions and taking them on as personal beliefs. So, for example, generalities would be all, every, or never. Those kind of things would be generalities. So, in terms of current events, for example, generalities could be applied to certain groups of people, whether religion or otherwise. All Christians are. All conservatives are. All liberals are. Fill in the blank for whatever you want. But that's a generality, though. And it could and should be challenged. So if somebody said, well, all conservatives are, you would say all? Depending, like, all conservatives are heartless. All? Well, maybe not all. Okay, so that's how you start to challenge. So in terms of EFT and tapping, for example, if you're working with somebody, say, for example, with relationship issues, okay, and so let's say it's a female client in this example, all men are dogs. I've heard that one before. All men are dogs. All. There's not one nice guy. And you could even use that as part of the tapping linguistics. So, even though I believe all men are dogs, is it really all men that are dogs? I love and accept myself anyway. And you start the challenge right there. And as you're going through, you can use the reframes. All men are dogs. Are they really all dogs? There's not a good one, not even just one. It's mind-blowing when you actually put those two things together. Okay, I've used it recently to do some major shifts in some personal beliefs and outlooks based on what I was taking in from media outlets and things like that. Deletions is another one. Deletions is where things are left out. Sometimes it's very subtle, though. So, for example, I can tell they don't like me. The deletion there is who's they. Okay? So, again, you could use tapping to start drilling down. Even though I know they don't like me, well, who exactly is they? Well, maybe that one person doesn't like me. Now, there's actually two things there in terms of meta-model violations. There's also a distortion there. And the distortion there is mind reading. Okay? That's one under the category of distortions. How do you know they don't like you? See, now, if you look and tapped on that broad stroke kind of thing, even though I know they don't like me, you might get somewhere. But if you start to really target it down and say, even though I think that one person doesn't like me because of the way they look at me, that facial expression, you see? So now you got towards something very specific. And that facial expression might actually lead towards a much more of a core issue. Maybe it's the same facial expression that their mother or father used to look at them when they were younger, and that's when they knew that there was a displeasure. See, something along those lines. So using the meta model is a real surefire way to cut through a lot of the fluff that some EFT practitioners kind of get caught up in. And they just kind of tap on that when you really should just be using this as a laser to drive deeper, faster, and quicker. Okay? Now, I would highly recommend, there's something called the precision model. It's a Tony Robbins technique. It's in his book, Unlimited Power. If you can get your hands on a copy of that, first of all, the book itself is awesome and in my opinion, a must-read. But the precision model, he uses a very practical way to use the meta model and to use it as a challenge to violations of the meta model. It's not an in-depth study of the meta model by any stretch, but in my opinion, having done that in depth as a master practitioner of NLP, you can get great results without having to go into that depth of a study. Okay, so I highly recommend the book and that chapter in particular, the precision model, and learn that very easy technique and use it as a guide to your tapping sessions. You're going to see it's going to pay off tremendously for you. At any rate, that's my video blog for today. Until next time, take care.